To be more specific, we also like to look at learners' cognitive, physiological, affective, and social aspects of their characteristics. In terms of the cognitive, we would like to know where their mental capacities might be, their abilities to memorize information, for instance, sometimes is relevant to the intended instruction and learning objectives. Sometimes it's not. So really, again, you need to look at your learning objectives and to see the role of their cognitive abilities. In general, cognitive abilities, we would like to learners to be able to perform basic skills, memorization being one, being able to differentiate concepts, being able to apply newly acquired skills, knowledge, and abilities. Those are general cognitive abilities we would like to see from our learners. But again, it depends on the scope and the depth of the learning goals and objectives. Physiological aspect, this is more relevant if the learning objectives are associated with certain type of demonstration through physical activities. Age groups, for one, will tell you something about that. You can easily see the difference in terms of physical strength between a group of 20 to 30 years old with a group of perhaps more than 60 years old. So that's just physical capabilities as they become relevant to the intended learning objectives. Affective, this is relevant to the earlier point that we need to figure out learners' perceptions toward one part of it will be toward the provider of the instruction. Also, it's important for us to figure out learners' general attitudes toward the topics, sometimes due to personal beliefs, sometimes due to other social factors. Learners might feel strongly about certain topics that you intend to cover with the instruction. It's always nice to know as early as we can so we can incorporate those considerations into the design of our instruction. The social aspect of the learner analysis would be more relevant if your instruction is situated in teamwork context. To what extent would our learners be comfortable working with peers in a face-to-face setting versus in an asynchronous online setting? So that's just one of the information bit we would like to get if teamwork or working with peers seems to be an important part of the instruction delivery. So these are four major and relatively basic components of learner characteristics we would like to collect from the learner analysis stage. Here's a table to show similarities in terms of the group of learners and differences among individual learners. That's the horizontal part of the table. The vertical part of it, you can see the stable and the changing aspects. So if you combine the two, you have the 2x2, four combinations to begin with. First combination would be similarities within the group that are relatively stable. So their sensory capabilities, their preference to process information, their conditions for learning. So those are three characteristics you can relatively see as they are stable within the group of learners. The second category, if you will, let's look at the differences among individuals that are stable learner characteristics. First of all, there are their aptitudes. You can get that information from, for instance, standardized test results. Second would be their cognitive styles, their habits when interacting with information. Third one will be their psychosocial traits that will be the result of your learners' interactions with social environments. So that has been accumulated for a while. So therefore, they are relatively stable. Your learners' gender, ethnicity, racial backgrounds, those are also stable characteristics among individual learners. Though your socioeconomic status, so this is the short list of the stable learner differences among individuals. Let's look at the next one, would be the changing similarities in a group of learners. The first one will be their developmental processes. Earlier we talked about Jean Piaget's work. If you can recall, the idea would be based on different experiences with social interactions. Learners' developmental stages might be similar to each other, assuming that they are interacting with similar social environments. So you can look at their intellectual, they can look at language abilities, their psychosocial behaviors, as well as moral standing. You can identify this category of learner characteristics for a group of learners to begin with due to their similarities. And it's the changing part of it that's different from the stable aspect of it. The next category will be the changing differences among individual learners. First one will be their developmental state. So in the previous category, we look at the developmental processes. A group of learners can go to similar developmental processes. For instance, they have gone through certain schooling. However, the outcome of the developmental process might be different among individuals. Therefore, this is a changing differences among individual learners in terms of their intellectual levels as one of their developmental state. Learners' prior learning, again, to what extent your learners individually chose to engage with learning activities, that also might be very different among individual learners. You might have a group of 30 learners intended by the instruction, and depending on their prior learning experiences, their responses to your instruction might be different. In terms of prior learning, these are two additional quotes just to emphasize its importance for instructional design. One is from Ausubel, 1968. If I had to reduce all of educational psychology to just one principle, I would say this: the most important single factor influencing learning is what the learner already knows. Ascertain this and teach him or her accordingly. Here's another one. The most important factor for a designer to consider about the audience is specific prior learning. Specific prior learning in this context will be learners' prior learning relevant to the intended learning objectives. So these two quotes again show us the importance of prior learning, and we should try our best to gather this information as much as we can during the learner analysis process. Another crucial factor when it comes to learner analysis is learner's motivational state. Learner's motivational state goes beyond, or you can consider the motivational state would be relevant to all four categories of the learner characteristics we discussed earlier. Why is motivation important when it comes to a learner analysis? Because motivational states will control learners and direct their flow of efforts during their learning processes. Motivation to learn could be situational. is somewhat complex, and it's changing characteristics among individuals. It's important because it initiates and more crucially, it sustains the learning processes carried out by the learners. In terms of learners' cognitive effort investment, in terms of learners' emotional engagement to the learning processes, to the learning text, those are both relevant for us to understand learners' motivational state. In terms of motivational support in instructional design, unfortunately, motivational support is often neglected during the instructional design process. Although it is feasible for motivational support to be realized through instructional strategies in order to elicit curiosity, relevance of the learning task, the confidence from learners, and the overall satisfaction from the learning experience. John Keller's work, ARC's Motivational Design Model, is a good reference point if you're interested in learning more about motivational support and how we can design them into instruction. In his work, attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction are 4 important components for us to devise instructional strategies for effective motivational support. Motivational support is also a multi-dimensional construct. People like to use intrinsic and extrinsic to differentiate the source of the information and the outcome of the motivational support. Intrinsic motivation is ideally internalized. Learners would carry out intended learning processes, participating in learning tasks without any external reward or incentives, which would be the extrinsic part of the motivation. Ideally, we would like to see learners to develop intrinsic motivation throughout the learning experience. However, extrinsic motivation in terms of rewards and incentives also play an important role in initiating the intended learning processes. So the reality check for this section: first, learner analysis is important. We all know that the value of learner analysis, but perhaps not implementable in some contexts, especially when you're working with a large group of learners, or learners are dispersed among different locations. Second, learner diversity is important and needs to be understood and incorporated into instructional deliverables. The diversity aspect of learner analysis can be referred to our earlier mention in terms of learners' gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, disability status, and relevant social stratification factors. Third, some learner characteristic information could be gathered through standardized test results, and usually that will tell you about learners' general aptitudes. In terms of their generalizability, we need to be cautious when applying those information to understand our learners. Finally, motivational support is crucial, but often neglected for many reasons. For one, again, in order to understand learners' motivational states, we need to devise instruments and spend more time to collect that aspect of data. And the logistics of it sometimes is the major limiting factor. Nevertheless, it is important to understand your learners' motivational states. Therefore, we can design relevant and effective motivational support.